They did not wait for the gods to come back. That is the first thing the tablets get wrong in every documentary you have ever seen about them. The Sumerians are always shown as people staring at the sky, hoping, praying, waiting for something to descend. They were not waiting. They were watching. And there is a difference. Waiting is passive. Watching means you know what you are looking for. It means someone told you what to look for. It means there is a list. And there is a list. Across the omen archives of Mesopotamia, tens of thousands of tablets, more records of signs and their meanings than any civilization before or since. There is a specific category. Not the everyday omens, not a dog entered the temple or the river rose early. A separate, rarer class. Signs that were not about the harvest or the king or the weather. Signs that, according to the scribes, would appear before the return. Most of them describe things that have never happened, conditions so specific they read like a lock waiting for a key. But not all of them. When you read the list carefully, and almost no one does because it is buried in a tradition everyone assumes is superstition, 3 of the signs describe events. Not predictions, events. Things with a shape, things you could watch happen. And 3 of them, by the description the tablets give, have already happened. In our lifetime. This investigation is about what those 3 signs were, and what the 4th one is supposed to be. The omen tradition of Mesopotamia is the largest systematic record of observed anomalies in the ancient world. Not the largest mythology, not the most elaborate religion, the largest systematic record. The Enuma Anu Enlil is the principal surviving text, approximately 70 tablets. The British Museum holds the main collection. The entries run into the thousands. Each one follows the same structure, protasis and apodosis. If X is observed, then Y will follow. An astronomical configuration, a meteorological event, an anomaly in a body of water, an unexpected behavior in an animal, an unusual formation in a liver. If X, then Y. The syntax of a database, the structure of a conditional system. They did not record these because they found them beautiful. They recorded them because they believed the signs and the outcomes were connected through a mechanism. Something generated the sign, something generated the outcome. The relationship between them was not symbolic. It was operational. They logged every anomaly that had ever corresponded to a significant event. They cross-referenced across centuries of observation. When a pattern repeated, same sign, same outcome, the entry was confirmed. This is not superstition. It is the iterative refinement of a data set. If you keep a record of signs for 1,000 years, it is because you expect the signs to recur. You do not maintain that kind of apparatus for phenomena you believe will never happen again. You do not employ professional scribes to copy and expand the archive across 30 generations for something you believe is already over. The Mesopotamian omen tradition was built on the assumption that the patterns would repeat, that what had happened before would happen again, that the archive was not a historical document. It was a reference system for a future that followed the same logic as the past. Every entry is written in the present tense for the condition and the future tense for the outcome. Not when X happened, Y followed. When X is observed, Y will follow. The scribes wrote as if they expected to be read, in a time they would not.
In the previous investigation, 3 conditions for the return of the prior administration were identified in the astronomical and administrative texts. 1. Precessional, tied to the cycle of the sky. 1. Institutional, the state of the governing structures of the current epoch. 1. Physical, the unsealing of structures closed at the transition. Those 3 conditions describe the mechanism. They describe the window opening. This investigation is about something different. Not the mechanism, the warning system.
In the Enuma Anu Enlil, most entries describe cyclical phenomena: eclipses, Venus cycles, seasonal flooding. These repeat. The scribes tracked them across decades to establish baseline patterns so that deviations from the pattern would be identifiable. But there is a class of entry that describes non-cyclical events, phenomena recorded not as part of a cycle, but as unique occurrences, a configuration that happens once, a state that arrives and does not recur. These entries are written differently, not when X is observed in the general sense of repeated observation, when X is observed as if referring to a specific event that will occur at a specific time and will not repeat. The tense markers and the contextual vocabulary make this distinction clear in the original Akkadian. Within this class of non-cyclical entries, there is a smaller set. The entries in this set share a structural feature. They are listed sequentially. First this, then this, then this. An ordered series, not a collection of independent observations. Sequential signs imply a sequence. A sequence implies an order. An order implies counting. The scribes were precise about order. In the standard omen categories, entries are grouped by type: celestial, meteorological, terrestrial, biological, because phenomena of the same type share underlying mechanisms, and grouping them helps the reader find relevant entries quickly. It is an index structure, organizational convenience. The sequential class is different. The entries are not grouped because they are similar in type. They are grouped because they follow each other. The sequence is the point. You cannot observe entry 3 until entry 2 has been observed. You cannot observe entry 2 until entry 1 has been observed. This is not a collection. It is an ordered procedure, a checklist. Each entry confirms that the transition is progressing. When the scribes wrote the entries in sequential form, they were writing a countdown. And a countdown implies a final state it is counting toward. The first sign is celestial. The omen entry describes light in the sky that moves, but does not move as stars move. Not the arc of a planet across the ecliptic. Not the path of a comet approaching and receding. Not a meteor burning briefly. Something that maintains a fixed position relative to the ground while the stars rotate past it. The Enuma Anu Enlil has extensive entries for known celestial behaviors. Planets were tracked. Their periods were established. Their retrograde motions were cataloged. The scribes who wrote this archive knew exactly what a planet looked like over months of observation. They knew what a comet looked like. They knew what was natural. This entry describes something they classified as not fitting any of those patterns. A light that holds, that positions itself, that does not follow the laws the scribes had spent centuries documenting. The entry does not identify the light as divine. It does not say the gods have arrived. It says an anomalous celestial phenomenon has been observed, one that does not fit the established patterns of natural celestial behavior. In a tradition where natural celestial behavior had been documented with extraordinary precision across centuries, where Venus cycles were tracked to the day, where eclipse predictions were accurate, where star catalogs mapped the whole visible sky, an entry that describes something outside all of that is a serious entry. The scribes did not record things they could explain in their existing framework. This entry exists because it could not be explained. What you make of the description is your own reading. The sign is in the record.
The second sign is terrestrial. The omen entry describes water reaching places it had not reached in generations. Not seasonal flooding. The scribes tracked that pattern extensively, and it appears in a separate category. Not the annual rise of the Tigris or Euphrates, which was normal and documented. Something different. Water returning to land that had been dry long enough that no living person had seen it covered. The sea reaching inland to locations where it had not been within cultural memory. Rivers finding old channels they had abandoned. The scribes described it as water that remembers.
An idiomatic expression in the Akkadian, but the operational meaning is precise. Water returning to a prior state of its territory. Not new flooding, a retracing. The system returning to a configuration it had held before. There is no meteorological interpretation the scribes could have applied to this that would fit the standard omen categories. It is not filed under river omens or rain omens or seasonal flooding. It is in the non-cyclical class, filed as a singular event. Standard flood omens describe excess, too much rain, rivers overflowing due to upstream conditions. This entry is not about excess. It is about a specific kind of reversal. Places where the water was, once, historically, within the memory of the tradition, and then was not, and then was again. Not a new flood. A return to an older configuration. The landscape reverting toward a prior state. In the Babylonian cosmological framework, this carries a specific resonance. Water returning to where it was is the natural world performing the same operation the administrative texts describe when an epoch transitions. A reversion. A return to the prior configuration before the current epoch's arrangements are superseded. The description of the phenomenon requires no translation into the present. It describes its own shape. You have been watching this happen. The third sign is the one that stops people. The omen entry describes what the scribes called tablets that are read without a reader. The specific Akkadian construction references the writing surface, the medium of recorded knowledge, and describes it transmitting content without the presence of a trained scribe. In the Mesopotamian administrative world, a tablet required a reader. Not just any person, a trained specialist. Someone who had been taught the sign system. The knowledge on the tablet was not accessible without the intermediary. The intermediary was essential. The intermediary was the entire bottleneck. The entry describes a state in which the bottleneck disappears. The tablet, the stored knowledge, transmits without the scribe. Anyone who approaches the record receives the record. The scribes who wrote this were not imagining a convenience. They were identifying a transformation in how knowledge moves through a population. A transformation that changes the relationship between the archive and the person who needs what the archive contains. Think about what this entry is actually describing. The medium of recorded knowledge transmitting without the trained specialist. The scribe, the person who spent years learning to read, made unnecessary. The archive becoming directly accessible. The scribes who wrote this entry were themselves scribes. They were the specialists being described as obsolete. They still wrote it down. They filed it in the sequential class, in its position in the order. That is a level of intellectual honesty that should not be passed over without noting. Whether what they described happened in your lifetime and what you would call it if it did, is a reading this investigation will not.
3 entries. In sequence. Non-cyclical. Filed in the rarer class. 3 signs that describe events with a specific shape. Celestial. Something in the sky that holds position. Terrestrial. Water returning to where it was. Knowledge. The archive transmitting without the scribe. The scribes wrote them in order. When you read them in order, you notice that the sequence has a logic. Each sign operates at a different level. Sky, ground, mind. 3 domains, 3 successive confirmations. In a previous investigation, 3 conditions for the transition were identified in the astronomical and administrative texts of the same tradition. 1 processional, the sky position is in its window. 1 institutional, the governing structure is in its terminal phase. 1 physical, the sealed structures are being opened. Those conditions describe the mechanism of the transition. They are the when. The 3 signs in the sequential class describe something different.
They are not the mechanism. They are the indicators that the mechanism is active. The operational display that tells the observer the system has engaged. The conditions you can calculate, the signs you watch for. Both are present in the archive. Both have been present for 3,000 years. And the list does not end at 3. The fourth entry is different from the first 3. The first 3 describe external phenomena, things you can observe from the outside, anomalies in the sky, in the water, in the way information moves, signs you watch. The fourth is described as something you do not observe, something you undergo. The scribes describe it as an internal change in the population during the interval between the third sign and the arrival itself. Not an event in the world, a change in the state of perception, the way the current population begins to see things it could not see before, or begins to remember things it did not know it had forgotten. The scribes described it as the Enuma of the prior administration becoming active in the people who carry it. That language is precise. It is not a metaphor for religious awakening or spiritual growth in any general sense. It is a technical claim about a specific inherited component, described in the creation account as the transferred Enuma of the prior workforce, bound into humanity at the point of creation, dormant for the duration of the current epoch. According to the creation account, Enlil's Enuma was not sent to the underworld when he was killed. It was transferred into the new creation. Every human being made through that procedure carries it, silent, integrated, present but not operational. The fourth sign describes the transition from dormant to active, a change in what the current population can perceive, a shift in the range of what becomes visible or legible to people who previously could not access it. Not a divine visitation, not a supernatural event, an internal change in the population that occurs when the prior 3 signs have been confirmed. That description is in a text this investigation has not yet examined. The fourth sign is the activation of what has been dormant. The scribes did not write this to frighten anyone. They wrote it the way they wrote everything, as a record. The only difference is the date on this one has not been filled in yet. One more thing, and this is not the usual ask. The list of return signs is not complete. The tablets are damaged, entries are missing, and some of what survived is a single broken line. I have read the comments on the previous investigations, and more than once, someone in there has pointed to a sign I had not connected yet. Someone with a memory of something they read or saw or noticed. That is not flattery. That is how this actually works. So if one of these 3 signs lands differently for you, if you think you have seen the fourth one already before I name it, put it below. I read them. The next entry in this archive may come from one of you. And if you want to be here when the fourth sign is named, you know what the archive needs from you. Nothing dramatic. Just stay on the list.